to you and your loved ones. Find out more online at sanjuanregional.com. Eight o'clock. It is Thursday morning, August the 19th, 2021. Good morning, everybody. I'm Scott Michlin. Thanks for tuning in to KSJE 90.9 FM, of course, over the air here in San Juan County, New Mexico. 103.3 FM over the air in Durango, Colorado, and streaming everywhere else on the planet from KSJE.com. Welcome also to our viewers who are watching this visual radio program. We are streaming live this morning to the KSJE Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and our Twitter account. We're glad that you were with us this morning, everybody, because our focus today is talking about recreational marijuana and the new regulations that were recently passed by the San Juan County Commission. We'll be talking about that in depth with my guests who are here in the studio in the next few moments right here on KSJE. And then, of course, next hour, Mick Hess will take us roving with the arts. He is going to be featuring more music from the great Igor Stravinsky on the program today. That follows our program today at 9:06. On KSJE. Don't forget, in addition to our social media platforms of Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, you can also connect with us on our Instagram page as well. And let's talk about the weather forecast, shall we? It's a sunny morning so far, 63 degrees in Farmington at the moment. We're expecting a high today of 81, maybe some clouds and sun throughout the day with some scattered showers still in the forecast. Today's high, as I mentioned, 81 degrees, 57 overnight, maybe a bit drier tomorrow with more sunshine with a high of 80 degrees on Friday, back up to 87 with sunshine on Saturday, 86 with a chance of showers on Sunday, and 87 for a high again on Monday with a chance of showers and overnight lows. Getting cooler. I think there's some fall in the air in the mid to upper 50s. Well, let me introduce my guests who are here with us this morning to talk about this new legislation and new era for New Mexico, which is recreational marijuana. San Juan County Manager Mike Stark is back in the studio. Mr. Stark, good morning. Good to see you. Scott. Thank you for coming in.
You bet. Always good to be with you.
Thank you. Good to have you here. Also joining us here in the studio is the county's new attorney, Joe Sawyer. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Scott.
Good to have you here as well.
Thank you.
And congratulations.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
On the new job. Going well?
Yes, it has been so far. I've been here since July 1st.
Very good.
Before that, I was deputy county attorney, so I've been with the county a while.
So you've already kind of been in that area for a while.
Yes.
And so that's good. But let's talk a little bit about this new recreational marijuana. I'm going to probably make that mistake numerous times this morning. But the county commission dealt with that just this week, Mike Stark. Is that correct? And passed an ordinance.
We did this past Tuesday, and of course, it's been a long process to get us to this point, and it really was precipitated, of course, first and foremost by the legislation the state legislature passed and ultimately signed off by the governor in a special session.
That was earlier this year.
You may recall earlier this year, and then the law went into effect June 29th of this year. 172-page bill.
Okay.
That had a lot of things in it that we had to absorb. Specific to what we were able to regulate, local government, only 2 pages of the 172 pages related to what we could and more importantly couldn't do. It was very restrictive, actually. And I think that's important for your viewers and listeners that we really had our hands tied as to how we could manage this. We were not able to prohibit activity of any of the various business types related to recreational marijuana.
But would you want to? Because I've heard it's perhaps an economic driver in some of these areas.
Sure. No, I think it absolutely could potentially benefit our economy as a whole. The state has revised estimates through time because, the recreational marijuana bill was introduced 3 years ago, and initially it was touted as $1 billion back to the state 2 years ago, about $500 million, and then I think a better estimate this time around that it may be a $250 million impact statewide. And the big unknown for us is what is the real potential of that industry here related to economic activity, related to tax revenue that may come from this industry, and it differs based upon the different types of businesses that would be allowed under the recreational marijuana bill.
Gotcha. So it may not solve all the budget problems maybe Santa Fe was hoping.
I don't believe so. It's gonna help, and it will certainly provide a few extra jobs and probably some additional revenue, but it's by no means a silver bullet to fix all of the problems.
Right. Understood. Well, let me turn back to Mr. Sawyer, who is here with us, the county attorney. And so with only 2 pages, it must have been an easy job for you to come up with a resolution for the county commission to look at, right, Mr. Sawyer?
It actually was. As a result, our ordinance is only about 10 pages long, and half of those pages are definitions, which we took directly from the statute.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Interesting. But there were some areas of, I guess, just not necessarily contention, but things that maybe the commission wanted to clarify or maybe change, a couple amendments that were passed earlier this week as well at your meeting on Tuesday.
Yes. I think not the most controversial, but the one area that people had the most concern about was the distance requirements. And the statute set a mandatory 300 feet or less distance requirement for schools and daycare centers. And that's from property line to property line. And then it was silent as to the rest of the distances between a cannabis establishment and, say, a residence or a church. It did say that the county could establish time, manner, and place restrictions and also density restrictions.
Okay.
So we started out, we looked at some ordinances from other states like Washington, and they start with a baseline of 1,000 feet. So we started out there, but our measurement requirement was from property line to property line, just like the schools and daycares. And we had some potential cannabis producers come forward and say, the way that's written, we could have 2 farms or a residence with 5 acres and then a cannabis farm with 5 acres. And if, even though they're very separated, the fact that they're lot line to lot line, they abut each other, and as a result, we wouldn't be able to have our business.
Right. The house could be 4 acres away from that farm potentially.
Right.
Is that that would still not be in compliance with this the way it was written originally.
Yeah, the way it was written, and I think our main concern with the distances was the odor of cannabis, because we've read articles and with the Shiprock incident where they were growing farms, we know there's a lot of odor. So, but as a result, they came forward, the commission considered it, and then they decided that probably the best solution would be to follow the state requirement for schools and daycares on the 300 feet, and then make the distance requirement be from the security fence of the cannabis establishment to the actual structure of the house or church or government building. And in that way, that would alleviate that problem of all that dead space that would be counted against.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. And that seems reasonable, but 300 feet certainly a lot shorter distance than 1,000 feet.
It is, and one of the things, we all did a lot of research. I think that the commission went, and they a few commissioners went and to a local cannabis grower that's located in Farmington, and actually tried to see where the smell, how far it was.
I see.
And they stood outside of the building, and when the vents were on, and they realized that the smell probably from 300 feet wouldn't be bad. It remains to be seen, because this is our first time with cannabis. So
Right. Understood. And just to be clear, we are talking about legislation that would be in San Juan County, so anything outside of the cities of Farmington, Aztec, Bloomfield, Kirkland, and the reservation. This is infecting property in the county only.
Yes, I should have clarified
No,
that.
that's all right.
But yes, that's the only place that this applies. I know that Farmington and Aztec and Bloomfield are coming up with their own ordinances.
Right.
And the Navajo Nation, I'm sure, is
Oh, I'm sure they're talking about it a lot.
Yes.
But yes, that's true. Mike Stark, back to you. You've had your fair share of public hearings and comments and things along that line. It sounded, it sounds to me that, at least from what I've seen in the other media, that some of the producers were pretty pleased with this ordinance. They thought it was fairly acceptable to some of their concerns and things along that line. They didn't have a lot of complaints, at least to my knowledge, of what was presented and put forward.
Yeah, no, I think generally speaking, most producers, even with the initial 1,000-foot requirement, were quite pleased. We had one gentleman who currently has a couple retail operations up in Pagosa and Durango looking to come down here, indicated that this was one of the most reasonable ordinances he's seen. In fact, very pro-business, and made those comments in front of the commission Tuesday night. And so, and that was really
kind of nice to hear about local government.
Yes, it's nice to get a positive comment every once in a while that
legislation.
We're not over-regulating. We're providing the right amount of regulation to keep. And really what it comes down to is, you know, the tool that we lack that other municipalities and counties have is zoning. And that would be the way in which you can say these activities, these licensees, whether it's a retailer or a grow operation or a cannabis consumption area, they can be located in these specific areas. You know, so for example, we haven't seen what the other cities are doing, but we understand that with their residential zone, they're probably not going to allow cannabis growers or retailers within clearly residential areas because of odors, because of traffic that could be created from a retail location.
Sure.
Well, that was the big issue that we had, is we lacked that tool in the county. And so we had to craft an ordinance that still kept with the general citizen in mind, who probably doesn't know what's getting ready to come with the potential influx of, and we think in the county that it's going to be more growers than retailers. We think the retailers are going to locate in the municipalities where there's higher, denser population.
Sure, but I would say too, you've got some highway corridors in the county that may be a spot for a retail establishment. I don't know. Correct.
There could be. But yes, absolutely, there's that opportunity. But what we were concerned about, and specifically trying to protect, are those clearly residential areas in the county where you have minimum lot size, 3/4 acre, sometimes less if it was a subdivision built before the Subdivision Act was in place, to where folks, because we lack zoning, they could potentially locate in somebody's backyard, and you've got right next door a family that likes to utilize their backyard, has a couple of kids with a swing set and other activities, that right across the fence could be a commercial grow operation.
Right.
Because personal grows, per the state law, are allowed up to 6 plants per person, up to 12. And so we are going to see that, and that's something I think folks need to get ready for, is that opportunity exists. But what our ordinance specifically allowed us to regulate were a variety of different cannabis establishments as defined by the state, but specifically we were concerned about the commercial grow operations. We think the majority of those are going to actually be located out in the county.
You're right.
And to Mr. Sawyer's comment about indoor operations, we're probably not as concerned about those, because I think generally speaking they're fairly self-contained, have filtration, etc. But you've got a little elbow room in the county and land and existing farmland specifically, that there are going to be some outdoor grows that we know are going to exist. And of course they're going to have the potential of providing that kind of fugitive odor that could make it across property lines and really cause a problem for neighboring residential areas.
Right, understood. Now, you've mentioned zoning a couple of times, and I know the county doesn't have zoning per se, but we've had several conversations about land use and things along that line. Is there anything in those existing codes for land use that you could use in relationship to this that we're talking about?
Nothing that would pertain specifically to recreational marijuana, and that's why we are glad that the state recognized there needs to be some level of local control, whether you've got a zoning code or not, and allowed us to regulate time, place, and manner. Because I made the comment to the commission Tuesday night, we do want the industry to be successful, but you're not going to be successful if you're mired in conflict with neighboring property owners. And that's really what we were trying to protect, is protect the property owners who may be adjacent to these types of operations, and more importantly, reduce the opportunity for conflict for both the cannabis establishments and then ultimately those complaints that would generally we're going to filter down to the county commission. Let's be proactive in trying to set some good ground rules so everybody has some good expectations in place before this industry takes off potentially.
Right, understood. But the land use doesn't offer any protection to a property owner in the county from a big farm popping up right next to my residential property?
No, today in the county we have specific ordinances that deal with specific issues such as junked car and junk mobile home ordinance. We have an adult entertainment ordinance. They're specific to certain industries that we're regulating, and so that's what this one does.
Sure.
There's nothing that exists today that could prohibit those types of activities, big farms as you mentioned, or quite frankly any other industries for that matter. It's a pretty open market right now in the county.
Gotcha. Understood. Mr. Sawyer, let me come back to you a little bit about this topic of maybe the land use and maybe not having protections there and just being able to allow these farms to go up as long as they meet that 300-foot requirement. That's really, sounds to me like the only restriction that they have. Or are there others?
Well, that is the only restriction. Let me. We were prohibited from doing a lot of different things. Like we couldn't regulate their signage. We could regulate their operating hours, and we did do that. We limited them from 7 a.m. to midnight, and we based that on the Liquor License Control Act. A lot of these are tried and true, and so we knew that it would pass muster probably if someone were to try to challenge it. But Mr. Stark is right. As far as land use goes, we just don't have much in the county, and we're not alone. Only 9 counties in the state have zoning, so that's kind of a common feature. Out in the rural areas.
Sure. And I think that's the common reason why a lot of folks prefer to live in the rural areas, perhaps, is because there isn't that restrictive zoning, perhaps, on what they can use their property for or things along that line.
Right. That's what we hear a lot. In the past, I think zoning has been proposed for the county, and there was a lot of opposition, and that was the main complaint, was that's the reason I live in the county, is I don't want to be restrained from doing what I want with my property. Right.
And I guess if that's what the person chooses, then they also have to understand they may have a marijuana farm on the other side of the property line.
That's true. Yes, that's the
that could be
risk
several
you run,
acres
I guess.
in size, I suppose. But you mentioned the hours of operation, and that you base that on the Liquor Control Act, which is kind of then for liquor establishments of the hours that they can operate. And so there was nothing in that the state restricted you on that they gave you kind of free rein on those settings.
They did. That was the time, place, and manner that we could restrict. We've put in a permit process where it's $250 for the initial permit, and then $100 for each annual renewal, and they'll have to get a building code inspection, a fire inspection. They have to provide their state and federal tax ID numbers, their corporate or other business information. They have to show that they're registered under our business registration ordinance. And the other thing we did restrict was we prohibited drive-throughs, much like the Liquor Control Act.
Right.
And also you can't sell from a mobile you can't set up a snow cone shack only for marijuana.
Gotcha.
Basically.
Wow, that sounds like an interesting business plan, but I can see why you wouldn't want to do that.
Right.
But there's nothing in the state law that would prohibit someone from doing that somewhere else.
That's correct.
Interesting. Got you. Let me ask you, too, a little bit about, and the question just escaped me here for a moment because I'm now thinking about these food trucks as marijuana shops or something, and I don't know why, but in any event, You talked a bit about the hours of operation and the following the Liquor Control Act and those types of things. I guess, Mike Stark, let me come back to you and ask you a bit about any public comments about this. I'm sure the commission maybe has heard from a few of their constituents, but what was that concern, if any?
Well, the majority of concerns were actually from prospective or current producers, growers, and retailers. Generally from outside of the area that were looking to come here.
I gotcha.
And so, yeah, we received very little feedback relative to those that may be living adjacent to these types of operations. And partly it's because, until you actually see it next door to you.
Well, if they just planted, they're not going to have any mature plants for a season, I suppose.
Well, it depends if it's in a greenhouse.
Yeah.
I think most producers in a controlled environment, indoor controlled environment, can get 4 grow cycles a year.
I see.
If you're in an outdoor environment, it's just 1 grow cycle a year.
Right.
So, but until that we actually see that production or we see retail establishments, I think, and that's what we were really trying to do here, is be proactive and think about, well, what's the potential for the industry here in San Juan County, and what are the potential impacts that we're trying to avoid? As I mentioned, the
Sure.
conflict that could come. We want the industry to be here, be successful, and be a good neighbor, but you can't always count on, and there are good operators, there are good producers. They exist today in our county as medical marijuana
Right.
retailers. There's a couple hemp producers in the county that are going to transition their crops, we know, to recreational marijuana. And then a lot of those folks are very responsible, professional operators. We always have to keep in mind, though, who might come in here and take advantage of the lack of regulation and provide a potential problem for adjacent property owners or just in general,
Right.
because they say, oh, this is great. We can take advantage of the absence of rules.
Right. And I guess, a lot of the rules were left to the state, right? I mean, that was that 140 some odd page law that they passed at the special session, correct?
Correct.
So they've listed a lot more things than we have this morning.
Correct. And here's the other thing. You may be wondering, well, why now with our ordinance? And you're going to see a flood of other ordinances coming forth from the local municipalities and all the other municipalities in county statewide, is the Regulation and Licensing Division for the state now has both the recreational marijuana licensing under them, and the Department of Health used to regulate and license medical marijuana. Now that's going to fall under the Regulation and Licensing Department, and they sent a letter to all the local governments back in early June notifying them of the law going into effect, and that they would start issuing primarily the grow type of licenses September 1st. So if a local government failed to have an ordinance in place, and those licensees came forth, the state would approve them, and then their location would be grandfathered in, even if the local government put an ordinance in post September 1st. So that's why you're going to see a lot of activity related to this in the next couple weeks.
Right, and we're seeing it, I think, on the agendas of the city councils and the county and things like that, and probably throughout the state. So it makes sense that San Juan County's ahead of the curve on this, at least as much as you can be.
We try to be.
Yeah.
We try to be on the forefront of making sure we're ahead of the game, not behind the game, playing catch up.
Right. Now, with some of these folks that maybe want to come in and set up a business, let me ask, and either one of you can answer this question, is there any background checks or anything else on these folks that want to set up a business? Is that more under the state's part of this law, or is it something the county can mandate as well? Mr. Sawyer?
Oh, I believe that's under the state regulation. They'll need to get a license as well,
Right.
From the state, and it's more expensive. I don't know the amounts, but I
So they have to get a license from the county and the state, is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
they do.
Gotcha.
Yes, and as a result, that's why ours is, it's just really to cover our work that we have to do. That's why ours is a little bit less than theirs. But they'll be doing background checks. The state also regulates things like you can't smoke marijuana in a public place. We echoed that in our ordinance, but it wasn't really necessary because the state's already restricted it. The state also has provisions regarding a security fence. They have to have video cameras in the establishment that the state can actually tap into at any time. They regulate, they track the plants, each individual plant as it's being grown. So that's another reason that ours was such a short ordinance.
Sure.
We just wanted to target certain things that we thought would be a problem.
Understood.
And one other thing I wanted to mention is that McKinley County, I understand, enacted a very similar ordinance on the same day, I think at 10 a.m. So
Okay.
Our ordinance is almost identical to McKinley County's. And I think also Roosevelt County has already enacted an ordinance very similar to ours. So there's safety in numbers. We're happy that we all have the similar ordinances, because if they come up to challenge, that's important.
Right, right. And there's still this area, of course, in federal law, because the federal government has not approved recreational marijuana, and so that kind of causes a bit of issues with the banking industry and other things along that line. Anything about that the county's able to deal with, or is that up to the individual and throws it back to the state again?
I think it's up to the individual and the state. I think Mike knows a little bit more about the banking side because he looked into that. But yes, the county doesn't have much control over that.
Gotcha. Mike Stark, again, does that cause any potential problems at the county level, I guess, if I'm trying to make a deposit and I can't take my deposit to a federally insured bank, can I?
Well, surprisingly, we actually attended, doing our background research on this, we attended the marijuana legalization conference in Albuquerque back in June. I think it was June, maybe it was July, but just trying to get a little more background information on what was getting ready to hit us and make sure we had all the facts and figures. And they had a couple of vendors there, and one of them was, I believe it was Southwest Capital Bank, that's located in Las Vegas. I think a couple branch operations in Santa Fe, 5 in total throughout the state, but primarily in the kind of northern part of the state. They don't have an operation or location up here. But they are FDIC insured. It actually caught our attention as we were walking past their booth, and they said, yeah, we've worked really closely with the federal government to become FDIC insured, because we think that, of course, would be a significant deterrent for somebody to use a bank. Would the bank take your deposits?
Right.
Because they, were concerned about federal government oversight, compliance, et cetera. And this bank said we've put together a way in which we can accept those deposits. We don't make loans to the industry, but we do make loans with those deposits to other activities such as auto loans and mortgages, et cetera, which was interesting to hear too. But they keep a very detailed accounting of those deposits. They seem like they've been, I think, doing this for 7 or 8 years. They have a lot of experience in it, and I know one of the medical marijuana retailers here actually makes their deposits, and they pay for armored car service down there, and that's the group they use for banking.
Gotcha. So it can be done.
It can be done. I don't believe there's anybody here locally that can handle that, but that's our understanding. So, and the federal government, just looking as overall regulation and compliance, it's coming, that with the number of states that have approved medical marijuana, New Mexico, maybe it was Connecticut, they're now 19. I think we were 18th and Connecticut was 19th. So we've got 19 states that have approved recreational marijuana. We're probably going to tip the scales once we get to 25, where the federal government's going to take action and actually put together some regulation related to that. So
it's coming.
It's coming, I would think, and that will actually clear the air for a lot of these issues.
Sure.
For everyone, because it is potentially problematic if you're a new entrepreneur and wanting to get into the business and trying to navigate how you do this right and make sure that you're in full compliance with the state of New Mexico, the federal government. And then, of course, with the local government now, we'll make sure that they're following our rules as well. So.
Right. Very good. Well, I appreciate you both coming in this morning to talk about this emerging topic. I think we'll probably be hearing more about it as we go, as you mentioned, probably from the federal level and other things like that. I guess my last question on this topic, and I want to talk about something else in just a moment, is, Mike Stark, are you going to be able to tax this and get some revenue from marijuana sales, recreational marijuana sales?
So, yes, in the bill, HB 2, The state law does allow for both the taxation of the local gross receipts tax in which the product is being sold, plus it allows for an excise tax, and it escalates up over time, starts at 12%, and then moves up, I think, 1% annually for 8 years. So that's just specific to retail operations. So depending upon where they're located. So we're kind of curious to see what that means for the unincorporated part of the county. If we're going to see, as we talked earlier, those retail establishments locating in the municipalities or in the unincorporated part of the county, there would not be an excise tax associated with medical marijuana.
Right.
It would just be the normal local gross receipts tax increment. And then from the gross side of things, we wouldn't see any taxation because that's going to be a pass-through onto the retail side.
I see.
And so that from the county's perspective, we more than likely will see the majority of grow operations. Nice to have that activity, economic activity in the county. And they'll be, they're purchasing fertilizers and water and, all the different things that are necessary to run their business. That will lead to some economic activity, but
Gotcha.
no direct taxation that we would receive from that. It would just be the retail side of things.
Gotcha. Understood. Well, again, thank you both. Mr. Sawyer, thanks for coming in. Thank you. Appreciate you being with us. And again, congratulations on the promotion to the big chair, I guess, over at the county. So good luck to you.
Thank you.
And look forward to talking to you again about something else, perhaps. And Mike Stark, before I let you go, I wanted to ask you a bit about the census numbers that came out from the 2020 census. We're still, I think, wrapping our heads around some of the numbers that are coming out, and it's not as detailed yet as we will expect here in the next few weeks or months, but certainly some distressing news, not distressing, but disappointing news for the county perhaps, that there was a decrease in population from the 2010 census to the 2020 census, but with some perspective. I wanted to ask you a bit about that because I guess it could have been worse. And it shows maybe some more recent growth in the county, despite what the numbers show on the surface.
Yeah, no, I would wholeheartedly agree with your assessment. It was
a rambling assessment, but I appreciate you agreeing with it.
Yes, yeah, rambling, but very accurate, I'll tell you.
All right, thank you.
It is expected, because the census is measuring a point in time. April 1st of going back to the last census would have been 2010, and that was the height of oil and gas activities here in San Juan County. So it was measuring the kind of the highest point, the high water mark for us. And then, of course, with the drop-off in activity and just kind of changing in the industry overall, that's led to folks to go find employment opportunities elsewhere.
Right. And I'm thinking 2010 we showed about maybe 130,000 people.
130,044 to be exact.
You knew that number. I'm not surprised. Okay, right. So
and so now we are seeing that decline and reflected in the April 1st, 2020 count. Of course, this census effort was different than any other in terms of COVID. And for us, we know San Juan County, and despite the great efforts of the Complete Count Committee that we organized and had a lot of folks actively promoting the message of how important it is to get counted, what it means for potential dollars coming to the county and a lot of other organizations here. We're a hard-to-count area. We have very remote locations in the county on the Navajo.
Even without a pandemic, we're a hard-to-count area.
We are. And so the issue that comes then with that is follow-up operations were certainly constrained, where normally the Census Bureau would make upwards of 3 attempts to go contact somebody after a non-response via the internet. That was the other challenge, is everything this year was internet based. You received the postcard and your code that you put in. But if you're in an area of the county, and we have a large swath of area in the county that lack internet service, then you're not able to fill out your census form. And so then we're relying on the follow-up operations to do that. And with COVID, those were severely hampered. So that no doubt led to probably what we think is an undercount in some respects.
Sure.
But you're right about, okay, let's look fast forward from April 1st, 2020 to today. We've seen tremendous growth in real estate sales. I mean, you hear from local realtors that, gosh, I wish we had property to sell. And when there is a property to sell, there's 10 offers and the price is escalated by 20 or 30,000. And oh, by the way, these folks aren't from here. They're not upgrading from
Yeah.
somewhere else in the county. They're coming from Texas and Idaho and Utah, and so we think that number, of course, the number is what it is, and that's the number that's going to stay with us for 10 years.
Right.
But we've seen a lot of growth over the last few months, and
Sure. And even some of the mid-census data that you were sharing earlier before we came on the air this morning was that in like 2015, didn't it show even a steeper drop of population than the 2020 numbers show?
it did. It estimated our population to be in the 115,000 range, and so it's come up.
For the record, where are we? 2020 census number? We're 120 some thousand?
Take 130,000. I don't have that number off the top of my
That one
head.
you don't have, okay.
130,044 less 8,383.
Okay.
You're better at that kind of long math than I am. So
Really? No. You've met me, and that's definitely not true.
That's our number.
Which is why I'm a broadcaster and not an accountant like my father was. But let's say around 122,000 and change, I would say, or less than that.
Yeah.
Right? You're doing
Yes,
it right now.
I was trying to quickly do the math here in
Right,
studio,
thank you.
but yes.
Thank you. But the 2015 number to both our points is it was lower than 122 or whatever the number was.
Correct.
From
Yeah. So we
2020.
actually have improved over from the midpoint
Right.
of the census to now.
And to be fair, the city of Farmington saw a small increase in population over that decade. I think an extra 745 people.
They did.
In the city of Farmington, and so that's one other positive, I think, part of this. And again, I think we're all looking to see. I don't think it affects our status as a metropolitan statistical area or anything along those lines, perhaps.
Well, there was a movement, and that's still an ongoing discussion of that changing potentially, and of course
That population base number.
the base number that would
I see.
bring you
Define
into
you
that.
as that.
Yeah, and so we've actually challenged that. San Juan County, I know the city of Farmington has sent in comment that we maintain an MSA status because there's funding tied
Sure.
to it, and so even if you've seen a decline in population, you should still maintain the status once you've achieved it, and so
Gotcha.
that's our position, and we hope that carries.
And is
through
that
the end of the
being
day.
considered a change from the state level or federal level, or
It is from the federal
from?
level. They were actually pushing that as a change
Okay.
nationwide, and we're not alone in terms of counties and
I imagine
and
there's a lot that would-
municipalities that are opposed to that. So
Got you. Because I would think, too, for economic development, when you become an MSA, that gets the attention of some of the other site selectors and other folks maybe that we think about for retail and restaurants or even other investment opportunities. That shows up on their screens when you're an MSA as opposed to not being.
it does, and that's why we're very concerned about that. Not just funding,
Right.
but the fact that we would potentially lose status. So
Understood. Well, that's for part of another conversation that I'm sure we'll be having soon. What do you got?
121,661.
Thank you.
Of course, it was a 6.4% loss in population
From 2010.
2010. So.
Gotcha. That's the current number from the 2020 census. Interesting. Well, we'll talk more about that, I know, in a further conversation. But again, thank you for coming in this morning.
You bet. Thanks for having us, as always.
Always great to talk to you. Mike Stark, San Juan County Manager. Again, Mr. Sawyer, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you.
County Attorney, we appreciate it very much. And this is KSJE. The time is 8:48.